Hello, welcome to the Autistic Witch. My name is Claire and I decided to make these videos to hopefully help other autistic people who also identify themselves as a witch. So what I wanted to talk about today was something known as toxic positivity. And this is something that I didn't even realise was a thing until recently. And what I realised is that there's an awful lot of it about, and it is what it says, it is toxic. And, with a view to constantly being positive, which actually isn't a healthy thing to do. So I have spoken previously on my podcast about this in terms of the healing sector, but I feel it also crosses over into the path of spiritual bypassing too. They can be quite similar. And what I'm learning about is the more I feel my feelings and get back inside my own body, is the more I've understood about dissociation, and also how dissociated I have been as a person, particularly as an undiagnosed autistic woman trying to work my way through life. Now, dissociation's interesting. I believed this was a personality disorder and thought it was an extremely negative thing. I didn't really understand what it was. And it wasn't until I got into recovery from alcohol addiction that I began to uncover a bit more about what dissociation was and how it was impacting on me. I realised that I had a huge amount of internal shame about how I felt and about who I was as well. So this has been a whole sort of unfolding process of recovering from alcohol addiction, learning about my autism and my diagnosis, and then kind of understanding how I felt all of this shame about who I was and why I behaved the way I did and why I felt what I felt, and also how dissociated I was as well internally. And I think as a result of being quite a highly sensitive person as well, really what I experienced, particularly as a child, was being told I was too sensitive, that I needed to grow up, that I needed to have a thicker skin, which to me was bizarre. I often wondered how that somehow worked, and I had this vision of like people trying to wound you, like and it not piercing your skin because it was somehow thicker. But anyways, this is how my mind works, you see, because I see it literally and in pictures. So this is how, just didn't make any sense to me how that would somehow work for words. But anyway, so I've gone through this whole sort of process particularly as a young person, and from being a child, of I suppose I had effectively been trained into dissociating because it was easier to not feel my feelings. It was easier to disconnect emotionally and physically from my body, because how could I have functioned otherwise? It was all very overwhelming. But there were also a few other things that I wish to talk about, particularly the version that I had seen, for example, of a male meltdown was this idea that it was very violent, that it was somehow like a tantrum, like an adult having a tantrum, and that it would involve somehow screaming and shouting and kicking and that sort of stuff. And this was the information that had been available to me at the time, that's what a meltdown looked like. So I was thinking, well, that doesn't happen to me. I don't behave that way. And it took me a little while to understand that for me as a woman, my experience was totally different. And it wasn't until I saw descriptions and heard about experiences of other women with autism and how they experienced meltdowns that it made sense. And to hear their voices talking about how this was how they wanted to be alone, how they'd become very quiet, how this was a very internal process, how they would want to cry, but also not communicate. And this was not about, flinging your arms around and shouting and screaming. This was a very kind of internal sort of, I need to retreat, I need to be alone, I need to process this. It was like my brain had frozen, and once I understood that was my experience, and that this too was a type of meltdown, then I was like, oh, now I understand. But what I also had to do was to pull out what was happening and what was causing that. And what I began to realise is that if I go through this process of toxic positivity, it's like I'm denying what's happening to my body internally. And this can trigger this type of meltdown. And it's almost like this domino effect, this unfolding process that I began to experience. So I'll give you an example. For me, in recovery and in both my recovery circles and healing circles too, I would hear, oh, you need to stay positive in order to manifest. You have to, just think positive thoughts. Oh, you need to somehow like override these negative emotions and put them to one side and just focus on gratitude. And in order to ascend, you need to be, have positive vibrations and make sure you're positive all the time. And what was happening to me is I was denying what was really going on, and the fact that I was feeling overwhelmed, depressed, stressed, experiencing being triggered from past traumas, and feeling really very, very triggered. I had to acknowledge what I was feeling. But instead what was happening was it was dissociating me further. So, I was retreating further and further inside, and those emotions have to go somewhere. They have to express themselves in some way. And that's what I found was happening. And again, something emerged for me that is very much connected to this in my witchcraft circles, was this idea that you would, again, it was all about being positive, have positive intentions, making spells that were about positivity, releasing stuff, that kind of thing. And all of that is fine if you have already been through quite a lot of process of healing and you have already acknowledged some of your emotions. What I found was happening to me was there was this like emotional backlog, and it wasn't helpful. And instead what I was finding was that I was just trying to effectively override what I was really feeling, what was really going on underneath. And it took me a while to work out what those feelings were as well. This has been a process of a number of years. This isn't something that happened overnight. If you talked to me 5 or 6 years ago about this, I wouldn't have known how I felt. I wouldn't have had a clue. I didn't know what my feelings were. It has taken me this has been a whole journey of learning about myself, of learning how I feel. So anyway, I've had to go through this whole sort of process of identifying what it is, recognizing it, and then acknowledging it. So what I began to feel with this toxic positivity was that it wasn't quite right and it wasn't actually helping me. I felt I was dismissing my emotions and discounting my emotions, and that was leading me further into meltdown. And sometimes the process of these rituals that at the time I was trying to do to manifest, to be more positive, again, I didn't feel I was truly connecting. And I needed to take some time to really think about what was going on emotionally for me. I now realise that I suppose I felt it was nonsense, actually, in the end. I felt it was unworkable. I realised that I needed to feel my feelings and honour them. And I began to acknowledge my autism, to acknowledge my feelings, my emotions, and to change my spiritual practice to reflect this. Move away from this idea of everything has to be positive, everything, needs to be high vibration and all that stuff. And I began to acknowledge painful and difficult experiences, and also to respect that as part of my human experience. These were my feelings, and I'd heard, for example, especially in recovery circles, I'd heard the phrase that feelings are not facts. The problem with that is it led me further into dissociating, to discounting my feelings, to saying, oh, your feelings don't matter because they're not facts. Well, okay, so they might not be historical facts, but they are factual to me in terms of these are my signposts. This is my guidance. This is my inner compass. And I have to acknowledge that. So I had to sort of step away a bit and go, no, my feelings are factual to me because they guide me. They help me. They help me recognize when I'm about to be really, really triggered and possibly go into meltdown, when I'm feeling overwhelmed, when I'm feeling really triggered, and they help me identify what's going on. So my life is less chaotic and things are, less of a shock to me. And I think that has been a really important part of my journey. So it led me to change the way I work in my witchcraft. What I do now is I work with intention still, but I also work to resolve things, to feel things, to heal things. I've worked a lot with dark emotions and shadow side as well. And what I realised is that, it's okay if I get stuck there. If I get stuck in these dark emotions or I get triggered, this is okay. This is part of the process. It's not about the end of the journey. It's about this process, this healing, unfolding experience that you go through. So, as part of my new practice, I find not only honouring the God and the Goddess and nature, but also honouring myself is a really important part of this. I see myself as part of this honouring process. And I see myself as not apart from the spiritual, the God, the Goddess, nature, and that it's almost like a self-worship process as well, that I am part of nature, that I honour the parts of me that reflect the God and the Goddess within me. And that's been a whole sort of revelation in itself as well. So my message is really to show that all feelings are valid, that you shouldn't just be focusing on the positive, and that it isn't just about raising your vibration and keeping everything like really cool and really positive. It's like, actually, you know what, it's okay to feel awful and to honor that, acknowledge it and respect it. And I feel honoring myself is a really important part of my practice. So thank you. I hope you've enjoyed watching this video. I'm quite new to making videos on YouTube, so please like me and subscribe or add any comments, and I'd love to hear what people think. Thank you.